Hey everyone, what's up? My name's Mark. This is Bumbling Through Dungeons, where we talk about dragons and dungeons, but not necessarily in that order. And today we're talking about why your party is together. So I think that this is a question that people are asking more of their groups. The trends that I see in 5th edition are people who want to play narrative games. You see less dungeon crawls and you see less hack and slash adventures. Those definitely still exist, and portions of those things still exist in more narratively driven campaigns. But I think the trend is to lean into the role playing. So people who are coming into the game in 5th edition, that's probably what you're most used to seeing. And if I were to venture a guess, probably most used to playing. There are styles of play that didn't incorporate that as much from past years that can still be very fun, but it's not necessarily what you see the most of today. So I think a lot of people are asking this and other questions about their group and themselves as individual players and player characters within the game. But I think it's worth visiting and talking about some of the reasons why your party might be together, and also reiterating why it's an important question to answer at all. So to answer why this is important, there was a little dust mite. So to answer why this question is important, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the first campaign I ever ran where we didn't do this, and it was not great. The campaign was fine. We had a lot of fun, and I cut my teeth on DMing. In that campaign, I learned a ton of stuff. I had a lot of fun. I'm still friends with all the people from that campaign. That group did break up. I still see a bunch of them, and we may play again someday, and I hope we play again someday. But there were some rough patches, and a lot of them were due to the fact that I was a brand new DM. And so I didn't have a session 0, which was one of my big mistakes. I've talked about that in the past. And one of the things that we didn't have because we didn't have a session 0 was us working out together as DM and players who the characters are together, like why they're together. So I basically just started us off. Here's the first session. Here's where you're at. Threw them into the fire, and most of them had played D&D. In fact, I think all of them had played D&D. So it wasn't that they didn't know how to play the game, but they didn't have any interpersonal connections in game. We were all friends out of game, so we made it work. But we didn't have connections in game, and I think that was a mistake. Now again, the campaign worked fine. We had a lot of fun, but there was never a sense of group with the party in the same way that I have since seen a lot of online, and also seen in games that I've run or played in. And I think the biggest reason why is we didn't take a second at the beginning to ask ourselves those questions. So the first bit of advice related to this is have a session 0. And there are a lot of things that I think you can discuss in session 0. And this is one of them. Why is your party together? What brings you together, and how did you come together? So that as the campaign is starting, you understand that and can get to the business of adventuring. And maybe the party isn't together at the beginning of the campaign. Maybe they have to come together within the first session or 2. That's fine too. That's a perfectly valid reason, but I think it's still worth talking through how that's going to happen, because it's not necessarily going to happen organically unless you have a shared understanding of how it happens within your group. So have a session 0. I did a video on session 0. I will link it down in the comments. If I can figure out how to do this on YouTube, I will have it as one of the video suggestions at the end. I'm not sure I've figured that part out there on the back end of YouTube, but if I do and you see it, awesome. But otherwise, it'll be down in the description, and I think it's worth revisiting everything that you might want to discuss in a session 0, because a lot of it is going to help set the stage for the tone of your entire campaign. The other piece of conceptual advice that I'll give to you is that you can ask this question of yourself and of the group mid-campaign, because the reason for your party to be together might change. And in fact, in a lot of campaigns, I think it will change if you have a lot of growth individually and also as a party. And there may be points, say after a particular story arc or say you finish a certain campaign, but you're thinking about continuing with these characters, there might be one or more characters whose purpose within the group no longer makes sense. Maybe it no longer makes sense with the dynamic of the whole group, or maybe it no longer makes sense because something's changed for them personally. Maybe it's with their backstory, maybe it's with their family, maybe they've undergone some sort of personal growth and they've found their calling in life and it lies elsewhere. That can be a nice way to retire a character and have some change and some growth in a campaign that allows for it to happen organically and allows for it to happen narratively. And I think it only happens if you're willing to ask yourself, why is our party together? Not just in session 0. Now, this won't always be the case. There are some groups that have been playing for years and years, and they have multi-tiered campaigns, and this is when it's going to be more important for these types of questions. But if you're sitting down to play through Curse of Strahd, I don't think you're going to stop midway through and say, why are we still together? Should we still be together? Because that's a campaign that is so tightly bound into a single story arc and a single plot hook, really. Not a single big plot hook. There are a bunch of smaller ones throughout the campaign, but your purpose there in Barovia and within the adventure isn't really going to change so much that you need to consider these questions. So this is contextual, as so many things are, but I think there will be times, especially in groups that run for a long time and chain together different campaigns, where it won't make sense. Where it definitely won't make sense, and some where it will. But to use another example, I talked about Curse of Strahd and how that might not make sense to split the party up forever mid-campaign. In fact, I think that would be very, very strange. But there are other times where a lot of groups come into 5th edition and they pick up the starter set and somebody runs Lost Mine of Phandelver and everyone has a lot of fun. And now the characters are level 5 and they ask themselves the question, what now? And do we want to continue with these characters? Because a lot of times level 1 to 5 isn't enough to fully explore a character, and so you might want to continue on with them. And so I've had groups come to a narrative impasse. So I've talked to groups come to narrative impasses at this point. They say, well, what do we want to do, and what group do we want to do it with? And it's not a zero-sum question. And I think some fall into the trap of thinking that you either need to entirely start over with new characters, or you need to keep going with all of the same characters. If you've got a party of 5 and 2 of them say, you know what, I had fun, but I want to try a different character, then you find a way to write an ending for their Phandelver character and you bring in the new one. And this, again, is going to require communication between group members, but maybe 3 of them want to continue on. So you're playing the same character starting at 5th, and then you go up to whatever level you go up to. But you might have a couple new characters of players who don't want to continue with that same one. I think this is not only perfectly valid, I think it lends a certain realism to the world that can really deepen the experience within those campaigns. So the last bit of advice that I'll say is something that is a bit of an aphorism, and it's that the stronger your why is, the stronger many of your role-playing elements will be in the campaign. If you can create a really strong why are we together, and it makes your group really tightly knit in-game, it's going to help with out-of-game dynamics. It's going to help you find really cool, interesting narrative beats within the story that you're telling together. So what are some of the whys? Well, it can be relatively spurious. You don't have to have something that creates a super strong why for your group. It could be that everyone has some fighting skill and is down on their luck and they have no money and they're just looking for work, and they all happen to take a particular job on a job board. You know, this is the classic, you start off in a tavern example, and somebody comes up with a quest and says, hey, can you do this? I need a strong group of adventurers to go save the goblin from little Timmy, who is just an absolute tyrant, and he enjoys kidnapping goblins. You know, maybe it's that, maybe it's on a job board. It doesn't have to be something big. That can be it to start. I think that maybe after that moment and after you do some quests together with that group, you might have to ask that question again if you want to continue on to a larger story arc. But it can be something small like that, and oftentimes that's the easiest, so that you don't have to create something really, really tightly bound to begin with. But in another campaign that I played, all of the player characters, all of us were siblings. And so obviously that's going to create a really strong bond. And it also creates a lot of interesting interpersonal dynamics, because you've got the oldest sibling and the youngest sibling and the middle siblings, and two of them were, I think they were twins. I don't remember exactly. But it allows for a lot of interesting role playing, and it gives you a really strong why. Are you a traveling band? Were you hired to do the same thing? Are you all involved in the same sort of work? Maybe you're all tied to a particular industry, like a research facility, a magical research facility, or a think tank doing technological experiments, or maybe you all work in a mine. I don't know. Even if you're a magic user in a mine, you can find uses for that. Or even if you're a fighter in a school for wizardry, you can find a purpose for those sorts of characters in those settings. Maybe they're just the security guard, but they're friends with a couple people at the arcane university, and something happens to one of them, or one of them finds a clue to something and they go investigating, and boom, they're a party and they're together and they're on this adventure. That's something I just made off the top of my head, but it's the sort of spitballing, it's the sort of brainstorming that I think needs to happen in order to make a coherent group that has a good reason for forming and then staying together. Another great why is a shared hatred of a particular institution or guild or faction or single bad guy. Quite famously, the Avengers were brought together by Loki. It's not that the Avengers all found each other and said, hey, we all have superpowers, let's do good things in the world. It was the villain Loki, and I'm talking not just about the movies, but about the comic book origins of the Avengers. Loki did a bunch of manipulative things, and each of these superheroes was sort of in the radius of his influence, and they ended up coming together and banding together to stop him. So the why for the Avengers was a shared enemy, and in this case it was Loki. And I think that can be a very strong why. So is there a villain in this story? Did that villain perhaps wrong each of you individually in some way? That can be a really strong why. And even once you've gotten revenge on that particular villain, it might be a reason to stay together because you all share the same types of values and all want to see the same things happen in the world, and see good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. It could be something along those lines. So there are 100 different reasons, 1,000 different reasons that you could be together as a party. I think the only wrong answer is not having an answer to the question in the first place. So that does it for this week's video. It is a little bit too hot for 2 layers. So the next video that I do, I think I'm probably not wearing this. But, I don't know, this felt like a decent one outside of me screwing up once or twice. We'll see if I edit those out. But I hope you got some good ideas from it. As always, I hope my blunders and eventual learning from those mistakes has helped you out a little bit. But until the next video, take care.